Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. Who's the scariest person you've ever met? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Had a neighbor in Virginia that was always friendly. He would help anyone on the block doing stuff, fixing cars, helping with landscaping, etc. For some reason, he always seemed a little off to me. I saw him one day smoking something on the driveway. Turned out to be a cat. Said it was rabid. Never really believed it. Reported what happened. Nothing ever came of it. About 2 months later, his girlfriend came up missing. He seemed quite upset. Other people in the neighborhood expressed sympathy. He would hold his face in his hands and carry on. Once I caught what I thought was a grin on his face when he turned away. Gave me the creeps, considering what I witnessed with the cat. He's the only guy who ever put me on edge. She was found in a shallow grave somewhere near Virginia Beach a few weeks later. Multiple broken bones, and her skull crushed in. He was the primary suspect. Was later arrested for her murder. He was grinning when arrested. Dead eyes, shit-eating grin. Moved away before the trial. When I was a kid, we lived on a lake, and there was a lakefront owners meeting every year. It was a few houses down from ours. The children were brought, and we would eat a lot of appetizers, color some, and hang out in a certain area with a babysitter. But as we all arrived, we were expected to say hello to the adults. One year, there was a new owner on the lake. The lake was pretty small, so there were maybe 15 owners at the meeting. I remember being very creeped out by the new owner. He just gave a bad vibe. I remember as we walked home after my brother and I told my mom we didn't like him. Cut to like 6 years later, my family had moved away to a different part of the state and were watching the news and realized the helicopter footage was of our lake. The police had identified and arrested the Green River Killer, who terrorized western Washington in the 80s and 90s. Eventually, the image of Gary Ridgway came up, and my blood ran cold. That was the owner I didn't like, and that's how I met the most prolific serial killer in the U.S. to this point. I've interacted with several convicted arsonists, murderers, pedos, thanks to past jobs. One of the subjectively worst ones was also one of the most charming people I've ever met. He just had this way of making you feel comfortable and wanting to be open and friendly right off the bat. But he had dead eyes. I don't know how to explain it. He made eye contact and was super expressive. There was just this disconnect that showed a glimpse of what he was hiding underneath. All the charm and friendliness he presented and encouraged in people was just to hide a monster. I have this somewhat negative dream about him once in a while, and it still wakes me up scared. An outlaw biker. I didn't know why he was in my shared apartment. He was mean. Something to do with weed. 30 minutes later, he had a .45 against my forehead. We were getting robbed. He held us at gunpoint and called his biker buddies. They stripped the apartment clean. The brand new Kenwood stereo, the Sony TV, even the silverware. Everything not bolted to the floor. I was 18. A guy I used to know. I grew up on a rough estate. Violence, drugs, all that stuff. The local pub had a reputation for being a roughhouse, and there were some dangerous guys that frequented it. Guys who had done violence and were quick to do so. The guy I knew, I had never heard raise his voice or make threats. He was unnaturally quiet and incredibly distant, and he had the darkest, blackest eyes. When I chatted with him, he was polite and respectful, but there was never a moment when it didn't feel like I was being watched by something ice cold and without remorse. Occasionally he would come into the pub, and even if it was a packed Saturday night, the atmosphere would change. The others, tried and tested lunatics, would see him and lower their volume. I've lived a bit, and I've met all sorts, but I've never met someone who made me want to be extra polite and careful more than he did. Chilling. I was working in a news agent in a busy shopping center. This guy came in to put money on his Go card, a prepaid card for trains and buses, etc. Anyway, he had the darkest, soulless eyes I've ever seen, an ankle monitor, and was carrying a shovel, with half his face tattooed, with teeth and a jaw outline. His head was shaved, and one side of his head was tattooed with the words, "Kill all rats." He was extremely well-spoken. He looked me dead in the eyes once, and kept his eyes to the ground the entire transaction after. I've only ever met one person that scared me, which is extremely weird given things. I was up waiting for my usual med appointment at the mental health office. There was a guy walking around the lobby in full hiking gear and a walking stick. It was shorts weather outside, but the dude was dressed like he was ready to go walk through a national park, which still isn't really that odd to see something like that there, and yes, he was just babbling nonstop about I can't really remember to the front desk, who just entertained it. Anyway, a guy and his kid, adult, come in, and the kid has recently been arrested and was talking about how they told him this meeting at the sheriff's office was optional and he didn't think he had to go, while his dad was telling him he did in fact need to go to it. Yes, they say that. When my husband got arrested, he had the same attitude. They sent him a letter basically saying, "Be at the next one, or we will come get you." So no, it's not actually optional. Anyway, the hiking dude overhears this, decides for whatever reason he needs to be involved, and shouts across the room to the guy's dad something about, well, he has a right to. But the next part, after he wasn't actually answered, was when he started talking about how it's okay, I know I'm the only real person on Earth. All of you are just in my imagination. I've kinda hid in my shoulders, hoping my psychiatrist would come get me for my appointment soon. As a psychologist with about 9 years of experience, I would say high bosses, CEOs, and directors often take the cake for scary people. They often score high on psychopathic traits, and I've seen quite a lot of them enjoying other people's suffering by their own doing. Occasionally, I'll also meet people who are well on their way to becoming lone wolves, people who are bitter about their lives, starting to stack up a criminal record, etc. The most scared I was during work was from a 1.9 meter dude who randomly became verbally aggressive. There was no obvious trigger for why he became so aggressive. I still feel bad thinking about it 6 years later, and I think my mind blocked the memory of all the things he said. I remember just saying he didn't have to pay because I don't get paid for getting shouted at, and he calmed down. There's a good blend today between family members and sometimes complete strangers, and then people you knew, and maybe just for a day or a minute. My last ex was a covert narcissist. Very scary because they pretend to be nice so well and try to break you down little by little with no remorse, to bring you down to their shit-ass level. I've been through it before, so I cut it off quick. Reflecting on it afterwards, only then did I realize what an insane bullet I dodged. I truly fucking evil person. It took a couple of months to process and get back to relative stability. Shit was bananas. When I was little, I lived in a house a few blocks away from a park. Next to the park was a soccer field. The soccer field was always being maintained by a very scary-looking man. He looked to be in his 70s, very tall, very skinny, walked with a hunchback, and had a lot of wrinkles. The scariest thing were his eyes. He had these huge, dark brown eyes that would widen every time he looked at you. He scared me not only because of his physique, but also because of the way he acted every time I was around. Every time I would go to the park, he would just stop and stare at me. One day I saw him at the park talking to another man, and after I walked past them, I turned around only to see the man staring at me, a grin on his face, his friend asking him if he were listening, Another day I was playing by the fence that divided the park and the soccer field, and I saw him approach the fence with his gardening tools, drop them when he saw me, and just stand there, once again staring at me. He did this so much that I began having nightmares about him. I couldn't help but feel like he wanted to do something bad to me. My father. He never really physically harmed my brother or me, but the threat was always there. Our house was never quiet because he was always verbally abusing someone. I later learned that Mom got much, much worse. Furthermore, my father was an admitted pedo. He got caught in a sting once, but he never served prison time. Based on one incident, this honorable mention goes to my brother. When he was 11 or 12, shortly after our parents had separated, he went into a rage and absolutely trashed our apartment. He also shoved our mom hard enough against the wall to put a dent in it. She wasn't badly hurt, but the entire incident scared the crap out of 15-year-old me. I refused to be alone with him for at least a couple of years after that. My babysitter growing up was married to a man, Mike, who was a housing development builder in town. He had a pretty good reputation for his quality work and quick turnaround, but as a child I always felt like there was something off about him. Like whatever he was hiding was just below the surface, and it really had a grip on him. He was never outwardly mean or aggressive, just a little strange. He ended up suddenly dying from a heart attack, and it caught everyone by surprise, including his wife and kids. Shortly after he passed, his wife received some paperwork from an attorney she had never heard of who worked for Mike. Come to find out, he had brutally murdered his parents when he was just an adolescent, and instead of going to jail, he was sent to a hospital until he turned 18. Since he had stayed in the community, he was permitted to change his name and resume a normal life. He never told anyone about what he'd done, not his wife, his kids, or a single soul, except for that lawyer who managed his estate and business affairs. My neighbor when I was a kid, Jack, not a big guy, not scary looking at all, really a sweet man. But as I learned from my father, who was a great pal of his, Jack was a master Marine sergeant who was on Guadalcanal for the first 6 months. See the Pacific. That was Jack's division. He was also in Saipan and countless other Marshall Island invasions. He took me fishing once when I was 12 and wanted to make sure I didn't get my ideas about war from John Wayne fake movies, and told me the real shit, e.g. sleeping with a knife and a .45 in hand because the Japanese raided every night, and finding your rifle in the dark took too long, especially when it was pouring rain. Of knowing a bonsai charge was coming because you could smell the opium they were smoking for courage come drifting over the rise, or what it felt like to kill a man by bashing him with a helmet. It worked. Scared the bejesus out of me. I knew Jack my whole life, and he was a godfather. Nicest, sweetest man ever. But woe to anyone who've with Jack. In a past job, I worked with people recovering from severe mental illness who had carried out serious offenses while unwell or unmedicated. I had a healthy wariness around all of them, but was still able to build a rapport and do my job well. One man was one missed dose away from serious violence, and it was clear to me that he was bubbling constantly beneath the surface. I dreaded any interaction with him and was very relieved I worked on shift when he didn't finally tip over the edge. Fortunately, none of my colleagues were seriously hurt. My now deceased neighbor, 81-year-old guard of the Barito family in Newark. Wicked smart, almost psychic, most intimidating demeanor. Wanted me to be his number 2 and meet some people. His story was damn near identical to Henry Hill's. He started doing deliveries and washing Mobsters' cars, and he eventually took an oath and was in for life. I once asked him, "You're 81 with health issues." He cut me off, like he knew where I was going with it. "It doesn't matter. If they call, I go." He told me stories that blew my mind. The 80s were lots of coke and more money than he deserved. They robbed everyone and partied hard. Rest in peace, Joseph Massimino. What's odd is that the murderers haven't been the scariest. Out of the normal parts in my life, the crown goes to one patient I met in a halfway house for dual-diagnosed substance abuse and mental illness patients. Residents could be out at a job during the day, but needed to be back at nightfall. This man had gone to jail after a psychotic break. One night, he realized that his girlfriend and toddler son were actually imposters and tried to kill them. Legally, he was never going to see or speak to them again. He and I would talk over a chess game. Table always between us, door always open behind me. He liked talking to me because I wouldn't go easy on the game. And we were eventually matched. We'd chat about strategies for the future, and he'd volunteer information on his experience for my senior thesis in psych. But as I pressed him playing, there were sometimes this moment that would scare me. He'd freeze, briefly. His fingers would crush the piece he was holding and shake. I'd calculate the couple of seconds I'd have to bolt through that door. Each time, he'd take a big breath, stop shaking, set down the piece as his next move on the board. It was really impressive. Last I knew, he'd gotten released back into the world. Runner-up goes to a tattooed gang member who once swiped into my motel room. Second runner-up to the guy who once met my ambulance crew by cocking a shotgun. My ex and her mother. Particularly my ex. I've never quite met a human being like her, and I doubt I ever will. That woman was so ice-cold, heartless, ruthless, and brutal that I often referred to her as a demon. To sum it up, she knows what buttons to push, and she will push those buttons all at the same time, repeatedly, with more force each time, while looking you in the eyes and grinning. When you react, she will blame you for reacting. If you get upset at that, she will laugh in your face. If you try not to react and just gray rock her, she will push and 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 push. You get the idea. Do you push? What makes it worse is that she is very aware of her actions. She just thinks it's hilarious. A guy I went on a date with, he seemed normal over messages, but it was like a switch flicked and he had something to prove to the devil. He was foul, terrifying, and disrespectful. I felt so unsafe. I genuinely thought that he was going to attack me the entire time I was in his company. Luckily, that time was less than a couple of hours. After I ran, I blocked him. I'll Google his name, certainly, and occasionally to see if he's been arrested for anything. Met police didn't or couldn't do anything. London was a cesspool for men who knew they could terrify women without consequences. My mother. Excuse you. You better not touch those. Thank you very much. Don't you dare touch them. They are for decoration. Understand, young lady? And go get dressed so that you can serve hors d'oeuvres and drinks to the company. I'm planning on having 12 couples tonight for a sit-down dinner, so you know what to do. And watch the pores. Don't be too heavy. Yes, ma'am. Those parties, by the time I was 8, I could make a mean gin and tonic. I would pass the hors d'oeuvres, which I had made. My mom is really smart that way. She utilized my talents from the time I was 8 years old. Baking is someone cooking. By 11, I was making dinner during the weeks after school. It was the 70s. LPT. Before the devil and God were fighting over which one had to take my mother, she was rarely a mom. There was a huge lightning storm the day I found out she had died. I told my daughter that God and the devil were fighting over Grandma. Neither one wants her. Okay. So before I died on my phone, I had her as Toxic Mom as her caller ID. For a second, okay, this is not going to be pretty. That gives you a time to just take a deep breath, and you're going to look up Grey Rock, and you're going to use it on her to be able to handle her so much better. Every time you get off the phone, you're going to say she was right. It's so much easier than getting instigated and upset with the bitch, okay? Because she's just a random bitch that happened to have sex with my father. And why am I letting her make me miserable for those minutes that I'm going to have to be on the phone with her? Can you tell I'm using voice to text me? I can. I'm passionate about this because I don't want anybody else to be in the kind of feelings I was in when their mother calls, because I know I was in my 50s when she died. She is the one that happened to say she didn't want to talk to me again. She actually told me not to call her anymore, because I had the audacity to ask her if she's going to go to the physical therapy after a major fall where she ended up in the hospital. So maybe your mom will fall and you'll be lucky. Probably the church ladies who smiled at homeless teenage me and tried ever so lovingly to trick teen me into a conversion camp. I walked into a church looking for help. I'm from New England. You can do that there. But I did it in King, Arkansas, and that went badly for me. I walked in and broke down crying because I was homeless and scared. They took me to a service, then a private room, then a hotel, then another room, then their cars. I spent most of it trying to convince me to go to this rural camp to help me reconnect with Jesus. During it, they asked about my family. I mentioned I have a same-sex partner because, again, idiot kid from New England. I got away by just walking out of the last hotel they paid for, and by the time they arrived to pick me up for another day of church and convincing, I was gone. I met a lot of scary-ass people, but come on, preying on homeless kids for your religion is the stereotype of an evil Christian. I thought it was a myth. No, they're real, and they smile the entire fucking time.